Charlotte Mulhall and Linda Mulhall. A passerby walking along the Royal Canal in Dublin in the spring of 2005 noticed something floating near a bridge. A human leg, still in its sock. It was the first thread of a case so disturbing that the judge would call it the most grotesque he had seen in his entire career. And the two sisters at its center would become known across Ireland as the Scissor Sisters. Linda and Charlotte Mulhall grew up in Tallaght, in South Dublin, in a household their own mother later described as scarred by years of domestic mistreatment. By the time of the case, Linda was a mother of 4 who had struggled with addiction, and her younger sister Charlotte had a handful of minor convictions behind her. Neither had ever been involved in anything remotely like what was about to happen, which is part of why the case stunned the public so deeply. Who was the man in the canal? He was Farah Swale Noor, the partner of the sisters' mother, Kathleen, a man with a documented history of harming women. He had come to Ireland years earlier and obtained citizenship, and to the family, he was the man their mother lived with. On a St. Patrick's weekend, the wider family had been drinking heavily together at Kathleen's Dublin flat when the night turned. What happened that night? After Noor behaved inappropriately toward Linda, and an argument erupted, the sisters turned on him and took his life in the flat. What followed was the part that horrified a nation. Over the hours afterward, the sisters concealed and disposed of the body, scattering remains into the Royal Canal, while the head was taken away separately and has never been recovered. How did investigators even identify the victim? Body parts were spotted in the canal in late March by a member of the public, and genetic testing matched the remains after a friend of Noor's recognized a football jersey on the recovered torso. At the flat, investigators found the scene had been scrubbed so thoroughly that only minuscule traces of blood remained. A retired senior detective later called it the best forensic cleanup he had ever seen. So, how was the case broken? Not with a raid, but with a conversation. The same detective visited Linda at home on the pretext of a casual cup of tea. And during that visit, she confessed. It was the unguarded moment that unraveled everything. What did the court decide? In October of 2006, Charlotte was found guilty of homicide, while Linda was convicted of the lesser charge of manslaughter, the jury accepting that she had been provoked. Charlotte received a life sentence, and Linda was given 15 years. Their mother, Kathleen, who had fled to England, later returned and was convicted of cleaning up the scene knowing what had happened there. And she served a short sentence of her own before being released and moving back to the UK. Where are they now? Their paths have diverged sharply. Linda was released in 2018 when her sentence expired, and a reporter who tracked her down reported that she asked only for privacy. Charlotte's road has been longer. After a disciplinary incident, she was moved from a Dublin facility to Limerick prison on Christmas Eve of 2018, a transfer she unsuccessfully challenged in the High Court. And today? As of the summer of 2026, Charlotte remains a life prisoner but is on graduated temporary release, with regular day and overnight stays, having been let out for Christmas of 2025. Sources expect her full release on life license to follow before the end of the summer, and she is publicly claimed to be a changed woman. 2 decades on, with the victim's head still missing, the most notorious of Ireland's female cases is finally nearing its quiet conclusion. The Mulhall case erupted in a single chaotic night of intoxication. The next would be the slow product of years of fear, ending in a quiet bedroom in the dark. Julie Ann McElwain. The court accepted that she had endured years of fear and control at the hands of her partner. None of it spared her a conviction for homicide. In the spring of 2022, In Dunmurry near Belfast, Julianne McIlwaine took the life of the man she had lived in dread of. And her case would become one of the most morally contested in recent Northern Irish memory. McIlwaine was a mother of 4, originally from West Belfast, and the court accepted that she had been the victim of years of domestic mistreatment and coercive control. This was not a stranger case or a crime of greed. It was a relationship that had curdled into something the trial would describe as mutually harmful. Who was the man involved? Her partner was James Crossley. Their relationship had begun in early 2020 and was marked by repeated separations, including a period when McIlwaine stayed at a women's refuge. The cycle of leaving and returning is one many will recognize, and it ended in the worst possible way. The trial would hear that the relationship had been damaging on both sides, but that McIlwaine had borne the brunt of the fear. What happened that night? At her home, McIlwaine fatally wounded Crossley as he lay sleeping in bed. Her young child was in the home at the time. She later told detectives that thoughts had overwhelmed her, that she had felt unable to stop herself, and that she had taken the child and run from the house. It was a confession steeped in distress rather than calculation. How did the case proceed? A detective inspector led the inquiry, and McIlwaine admitted inflicting the fatal wounds, but argued a partial defense of loss of self-control as a victim of domestic mistreatment. The trial was held at Coleraine Crown Court, and that defense sat at the heart of it. Was this a woman who had finally broken under years of torment? Or had she crossed a line the law could not excuse? It is precisely the kind of question that has driven a wider public debate about how the courts should treat someone who turns on the person who has tormented them. What did the jury decide? In October of 2024, after more than 8 hours of deliberation across 2 days, a jury of 5 men and 7 women unanimously convicted her of homicide. The length of those deliberations hinted at how hard the choice had been. The rejection of her loss of control defense was the most legally significant moment of the case, drawing a hard line between provocation and homicide that many found difficult to accept. What sentence did she receive? In May of 2025, the judge set a minimum term of 12 years before she can be considered for parole, the lowest minimum permitted under Northern Ireland sentencing guidelines. That choice of the lowest possible minimum spoke quietly to the mistreatment the court accepted she had suffered, even as it upheld the conviction. It was, in effect, a sentence that acknowledged both the gravity of what she had done and the years of torment that had preceded it. Where does it stand now? McIlwaine is serving her life sentence at a women's prison near Belfast, with parole consideration not possible until around the middle of the next decade. Her case continues to be cited in debates about how the justice system should treat those who harm and abuse her. It is the rare entry on this list where the question is not whether she did it, but whether the law drew its line in the right place. For her 4 children, and for the family of the man who lost his life, there are no easy answers. Only the long years of a sentence, the harder questions it leaves behind. McIlwaine turned on a partner after years of torment. The next would turn on a trusted friend, and the motive was not fear at all, but money. Svetlana Svedova. The morning after her friend lost her life, Svetlana Svedova turned up at the wine bar where they had both worked, ready to cover her friend's shift, with fresh injuries visible on her arms. It was the spring of 2021 in Limavady in Northern Ireland. And that brazen appearance would help unravel one of the most cold-blooded betrayals in the region's recent history. Svedova, originally from Latvia, had once worked alongside her victim at a wine bar in the town, and the two were former colleagues and friends. This was not a stranger who slipped into a home in the night. It was someone the victim knew, trusted, and had shared a workplace with, which is what made the betrayal so total when it came. Who was the woman she turned on? Ludmila Poletilova was a mother of 2 adult sons who had been born in Russia, spent most of her life in Latvia, and moved to Northern Ireland years earlier. And she was remembered by the judge as someone who had helped fellow Latvians and Eastern Europeans struggling to find their footing. She was, by every account, a kind and generous person, which makes what happened all the harder to absorb. What happened in that flat? At Poletilova's home, Svedova fatally injured her with a hammer, then took money from the flat. The motive, stripped of everything else, was simply theft from a friend. What did she do next? Something almost impossible to comprehend. On the morning after, despite having no obvious source of funds, she paid hundreds of pounds in cash toward her rent arrears. Then she went to the wine bar to cover Poletilova's shift, with injuries to her arms that anyone might have noticed. It was that combination of sudden cash and her appearance at work that drew suspicion almost immediately. How was she caught? The victim's body was not discovered for 3 days until her employer sent a colleague to check on her after she failed to appear for a shift. By then, investigators were already looking at Svedova, and they built a case from phone records, CCTV, witness accounts, and forensic evidence, including the victim's blood found on a coat and a bag in Svedova's home. The physical trail left little room for doubt. Her sudden cash, her injuries, and her decision to step into her friend's role at work formed a pattern that pointed in only one direction. Did she admit it? Not at first. Svedova insisted she had only visited and drunk with her friend, maintaining her innocence until finally pleading guilty in December of 2022. Only when the weight of the forensic and circumstantial evidence became overwhelming did she stop denying it, sparing the victim's family the ordeal of a full trial, but offering nothing by way of explanation. What sentence did she receive? In March of 2023, she was given life imprisonment with a minimum of 16 years before parole can be considered. The judge found no clear premeditation, but said the crime was aggravated by the friendship she had betrayed, the ferocity of what was done, the body being left for 3 days, and her attempts to dispose of evidence. And he remarked that there was no real evidence of remorse. Where does it stand now? Svedova is serving her life sentence at a women's prison near Belfast, with the earliest parole consideration falling years into the future once time on remand is counted. A woman who had once helped strangers find their feet in a new country lost her life to someone she had counted as a friend, for a sum of money that would barely register against the cost of it. Of all the cases here, it may be the one driven by the smallest motive and the largest betrayal. Svedova's crime was sudden and opportunistic. The next was the opposite. A homicide plotted in advance and dressed up as something else entirely, by a woman who would become the most infamous of them all. Catherine Nevin. At 4:30 in the morning, a panic alarm sounded at a roadside inn on the road south of Dublin. When Gardaí arrived, they found the publican slumped on his own kitchen floor, and his wife with a story about masked raiders. It was the spring of 1996, and Catherine Nevin was about to become the most infamous woman in Irish legal history, remembered ever after as the Black Widow. Nevin and her husband Tom, a publican described by those who knew him as a gentle giant, had built up a property portfolio before taking over Jack White's Inn in County Wicklow. On the surface, they were a successful couple. Beneath it, the marriage had collapsed. What was really going on? By that point, the couple slept in separate bedrooms. and Catherine was conducting multiple affairs while standing to inherit a sum of around £1 million on his passing. Her relationships were said to have spanned men of standing and reputation, and the contrast between that secret life and the loyal husband counting the till made the motive, in hindsight, hide in plain sight. What happened that night? As Tom counted the St. Patrick's Day takings in the early hours, he was fatally wounded by a single shotgun blast at close range. Money was missing, and the family car had been taken. Catherine told Gardaí that masked raiders had tied her up, demanded money, and threatened her life. It was meant to look like a robbery gone wrong. Why didn't investigators believe her? Because the scene did not add up. The supposed burglary was riddled with inconsistencies. Drawers lifted out and set down rather than ransacked. Jewelry scattered but not taken. No sign of forced entry. And Catherine triggering a panic alarm at the front door rather than rousing her husband or staff. The staging was too neat and the details too convenient. What turned suspicion into a case? 3 separate men eventually told Gardaí that Catherine had, in the years beforehand, approached each of them trying to hire someone to take her husband's life. Their accounts, given independently, painted a picture of a woman who had been trying to arrange her husband's end for a long time. The actual gunman was never identified. But that pattern of past solicitations became the spine of the prosecution's case. What was the trial like? Unlike anything Ireland had seen. It ran 42 days, heard 170 witnesses, and ended with the jury deliberating for more than 29 hours, the longest jury deliberation in the history of the Irish state at the time. In April of 2000, she was convicted of his homicide and of 3 counts of soliciting others to take his life. The judge told her she had not only arranged for her husband to be taken, but had also tried to destroy his good name. It was a line that captured the cold calculation the jury had seen. A betrayal of marriage compounded by the attempt to smear the very man she had wronged. What happened to her after that? She received a mandatory life sentence, plus a further term for the solicitations, and she lost every appeal she mounted, including a later attempt to have the conviction declared a miscarriage of justice. For years she remained in custody at a Dublin women's prison, still insisting on her account of masked raiders, a story no court ever believed. How did her story end? In 2016, she was diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor, and the following year she was granted compassionate release on license. She passed away at a care facility in Dublin in February of 2018, aged 67. The gunman who actually ended Tom Nevin's life was never charged, and the woman who arranged it took whatever she knew of him to her grave. Nevin's motive was money and freedom, and her target was the, if you've made it this far and enjoyed deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. The next case would be unlike any other here. A life taken not for love or money, but for a cause and a victim who had done nothing at all. Rose Lynch. He was a van driver and a father of 2 who had nothing to do with crime or politics. That did not save him. In the winter of 2011, on a quiet Dublin morning, David Darcy was about to leave for work when a woman he had never met ended his life over a case of mistaken identity. In the only ideologically driven case among these 8, Rose Lynch was a mother of 4 from Limerick with no previous convictions. A woman who had studied social studies and psychology and worked as a volunteer and an anti-drug campaigner. On the surface, she was the last person anyone would expect. Yet she was also an avowed member of the Continuity IRA, telling Gardaí she considered herself a true volunteer. Who was the man she targeted? David Darcy was 39, a van driver for a butcher, with no involvement whatsoever in crime or subversive activity, and he was a complete stranger to Lynch. His ordinariness is the heart of the tragedy. Why him then? The answer was a catastrophic mistake. Lynch and her organization wrongly believed Darcy had been involved in the loss of one of their own, and they set out to take revenge on entirely the wrong man. There was no truth to it at all. Darcy was simply a working father who fit some mistaken description. Afterward, the group issued a statement falsely claiming the act had targeted a criminal gang, a claim a senior detective dismissed as total lies. What happened that morning? Lynch and a male accomplice used a car stolen days earlier to watch Darcy's home. And as he sat in his van on his own driveway, about to set off for work, Lynch fatally wounded him. The vehicle they had used was then burned out nearby to destroy any trace. How were they caught? Lynch and her accomplice were arrested weeks later when Gardaí stopped a car traveling from Dublin and found it carrying rounds of ammunition. Over a series of interviews, Lynch admitted to detectives that she had carried out the act herself. There was no ambiguity in her confession, only the chilling calm of someone who believed she had been right. She described herself to Gardaí as a true volunteer, framing what she had done not as a crime, but as an operation. What happened in court? On the day her trial was due to begin at the non-jury Special Criminal Court in 2013, Lynch unexpectedly pleaded guilty. As she was led away, she raised a clenched fist and shouted a Republican slogan, a final, defiant gesture that left no doubt about where her loyalties lay. What sentence did she receive? The presiding judge imposed a mandatory life sentence, describing the crime as premeditated, calculated, and cold-blooded, and noting that Lynch had shown no remorse. She also received lengthy concurrent sentences for her organization membership and for firearms and ammunition offenses. The judge's words underlined how deliberate it had all been, from the surveillance to the stolen car to the cover story afterward. Where does it stand now? Lynch is serving her life sentence, with no public indication of release, and she has remained an unrepentant volunteer in custody. For the Darcy family, the cruelty of the case is doubled. Not only did they lose a father of two who had harmed no one, but the woman responsible has never expressed regret, because she never believed she did anything wrong. He lost his life over a feud he had no part in, identified in error by people who never knew his face. Lynch took a life for a cause she believed in, against a man she had never met. The next would be the oldest motive of all, a wife, a lover, and a husband who stood in the way. Julie McGinley. A child gathering moss for her grandmother in a remote wood near the border stumbled upon a set of skeletal remains. It was the summer of 2001, and that discovery would finally answer a question that had haunted 2 jurisdictions for 10 months. Where was Jerry McGinley? The answer would expose his own wife. Julie McGinley was a mother of 2 from Enniskillen, raised in a respectable family who had married Jerry and run a furniture business with him and a business partner. As a young woman, she had been at the Enniskillen Remembrance Sunday gathering in 1987 when a bomb tore through the crowd, and she had been separated from her younger brother in the chaos. From the outside, hers later looked like an ordinary working marriage. Beneath it, Julie was conducting an affair with that very business partner, a man named Michael Monaghan. Who was the victim? Gerald McGinley, known as Jerry, was Julie's husband and business partner. He had a troubled past of his own, but in this story, he was the man who stood between his wife and the life she wanted with another man. What was the motive? It was a familiar combination. Julie was in love with the business partner. Jerry was an obstacle, and on his passing she stood to collect a large insurance payout of more than £300,000. An earlier scheme to have Jerry imprisoned by planting illicit substances in his car had failed, and the conspirators turned from framing him to something far worse. What happened that night? After an evening of drinking at a local hotel, Jerry was fatally injured in his own bed at the family home, while his 2 young daughters slept in another room. His body was then taken across the border into the Republic and left in a remote wooded area, partially covered with black plastic. For months afterward, Julie maintained that her husband had simply run off and abandoned the family, a story that bought the conspirators almost a year. How did the case come together? Police on both sides of the border searched for 10 months before the remains were found, and the prosecution case leaned heavily on telephone evidence. A network of mobile phones falsely registered in other people's names, the so-called ghost telephones, linked Julie to Monaghan and to a third man at the crucial times, building a web of contact that her story could not explain. The pattern of calls between the conspirators in the hours around Jerry's disappearance was something no innocent explanation could account for. What did the jury decide? After a trial lasting some 13 weeks, the jury took under 3 hours to convict both Julie McGinley and her lover of the crime. Both received mandatory life sentences with a minimum term of 15 years. The judge calling the crime callous and chilling and observing that the lover would never have been involved but for the affair. Where is she now? Julie McGinley was released on life license in the years after 2015, when reports placed her on phased release and noted she was barred from entering Enniskillen, the town where it had all happened. Michael Monaghan, her partner in the crime, served his own life sentence alongside her conviction. She is understood to have built a new and quiet life elsewhere, free while the man she married lay for months in a border wood before a child stumbled on what was left of him. The lie that he had run away held just long enough to nearly succeed, undone in the end by a network of phones and a patch of moss. McGinley and her lover hid a husband's body across the border and waited. The next case followed an almost identical script. Another wife, another lover, another insurance policy, and another staged story. Jacqueline Crimble. On Father's Day, a devoted father who did not drink and doted on his 2 children was set upon in his own home and never saw the night out. It was the summer of 2004 in County Armagh, and the person who had arranged it was the woman who had married him when they were both 17. Jacqueline Crimble was a housewife who had met her husband Paul as teenagers, the two having been together since they were 17, and the couple lived with their 2 children, Danielle and Adam. To those around them, they were a settled family with a long history together. Jacqueline, however, had taken a lover, a man named Roger Ferguson, and she had a plan to be rid of the husband who stood between them. Who was the victim? Paul Crimble was a mechanical engineer described by the trial judge as a dedicated and loving father who did not drink. By every account, he was a good man, which makes the betrayal that ended his life all the harder to take. What was the motive? It was money and freedom. A life insurance policy on Paul worth £300,000, and the wish of Jacqueline and Ferguson to remove the obstacle to a comfortable future together. Prosecutors revealed she had even tried to engage someone to do it years earlier, meaning this was no sudden impulse, but a long-held intention that she had simply waited to carry out. What happened that night? After socializing with Paul, the lover joined them, and back at the family home, Paul was restrained and his life was taken while the pair were present. His body was placed in the boot of his own car and abandoned in a laneway, where a farmer later discovered it. Jacqueline's first story was that masked men demanding money and valuables had broken in, harmed Paul, and taken him while she lay tied up. How did the truth surface? Forensic tests undid her account. Her own genetic material was found on the bag placed around Paul's head, and cigarette butts near his vehicle linked both her and Roger Ferguson to the scene. Crucial supporting testimony also came from Paul's own mother, Shirley Crimble, who refused to let the matter rest and stood against her former daughter-in-law in court. It was the rare case where a victim's mother became one of the most important witnesses against the woman her son had married. What did the court decide? After a 4-month trial in 2007, the jury took only a few hours to convict both Jacqueline and Roger Ferguson, while a third man was convicted of helping them, and Ferguson's mother was dealt with for providing a false alibi. Jacqueline was sentenced to life with a minimum tariff of 20 years, and Ferguson received life with a minimum of 18. The judge said the crime had been planned in advance and was driven by money and easy comfort. Her appeal failed. Where does it stand now? Jacqueline is serving her life sentence, with her 20-year minimum due to expire in 2027, at which point she can apply to the parole authorities. She has continued to maintain her innocence. Her lover has reportedly been released, and Paul's mother, who fought so hard for the conviction, passed away in 2017, a decade after seeing the pair jailed. A loving father was lost so that two people could be together and comfortable, and the woman at the center of it still insists she had no part in it. Crimble dressed her crime up as a robbery by masked men. The last case involved a staging even more elaborate, 2 victims instead of 1, and a lie that held for 18 years. Hazel Stewart. For 18 years, it was accepted as a tragic double loss. 2 people found in a fume-filled garage, presumed to have taken their own lives together. Only decades later did the truth emerge, that it had been a carefully staged scene, and that a former Sunday school teacher had helped arrange the deaths of her own husband and her lover's wife. Hazel Stewart was a church-going woman from a comfortable estate in Coleraine, who was married to a police constable when she began an affair with a local dentist, Colin Howell, the pair having met through swimming lessons organized by their Evangelical Baptist Church. What began as a secret relationship between 2 married members of the same congregation would end in 2 deaths and an 18-year deception that fooled investigators, neighbors, and both grieving families. Who were the victims? Leslie Howell was the wife of Hazel's lover and the mother of his 4 children, and Trevor Buchanan was Hazel's own husband, a uniformed police officer. 2 innocent spouses, removed so that the 2 people having the affair could be together. What happened in 1991? Colin Howell took the lives of both Leslie and Trevor using fumes from a car, with Hazel's agreement and her help in gaining access, and he then staged the scene to look as though the 2 had taken their own lives together. The motive was the affair and money. Leslie had recently come into a substantial inheritance after the loss of her father just days earlier, and Howell stood to gain a great deal from her passing, eventually receiving well over £400,000 from her estate, insurance, and related policies. Why did it take so long? The original investigation was deeply flawed. Despite physical clues that did not fit, such as a car window left open and a loosely fitted hose, the theory that the couple had ended their own lives was accepted, and the families were, in the words of a later watchdog, failed by the police. For 18 years, the lie held, and the 2 families grieved a tragedy that had never really happened. What finally broke it? In 2009, Colin Howell, his life unraveling after financial ruin and the loss of his own son, confessed to elders of his church, who told him to go to the police and he implicated Hazel. The cover-up that had survived nearly 2 decades collapsed in a matter of weeks once the man who built it decided to speak. What happened at trial? Howell pleaded guilty and received a life sentence with a minimum of 21 years. Hazel contested her trial in 2011, and after a 15-day hearing, a jury took just 2 hours to unanimously convict her of both deaths. She did not testify. She was sentenced to life with a minimum tariff of 18 years. Has she tried to overturn it? Repeatedly and without success. Her appeals in the years after conviction all failed. And in June of 2025, the Court of Appeal in Belfast, with the Lady Chief Justice presiding, refused her bid to reduce her sentence on the basis of fresh psychiatric evidence claiming coercive control. The court said the sentence was neither wrong nor manifestly excessive, and that the appeal would only cause further stress and upset to the families. Where does it stand now? Stewart remains in prison, and her lawyer has indicated she is considering a further application to a review body, while she remains eligible for parole consideration only toward the end of the decade. Colin Howell remains in prison as well, serving his own longer term. 2 ordinary, trusting spouses lost their lives in a single night. Their deaths dressed up as a shared tragedy. And it took 18 years, a confession in a church, and a jury's 2-hour verdict to finally name what had really happened in that garage. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.